Metabolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Pro Physique Code. I'm here with my man Steve Bogran, and today we got a combo episode.
Combo, like the snacks with the little pretzels with the filling, right?
Man, miss those. I like the pizza ones. What was your favorite?
The pizza ones. I mean, come on. That was the best one.
I mean, the peanut butter ones were pretty good too.
I've never been a big peanut butter. The only time I like peanut butter is if I'm like really lean. Otherwise, I can have nothing to do with it.
You're gonna laugh. If you scroll back on my Instagram like a decade, I actually made a graph that showed the inverse relationship to how lean I was and how much I liked peanut butter. I literally showed because I could care less about peanut butter right now, but when I'm stage lean, I would literally plan my day around 2 scoops of peanut butter on a rice cake.
Yeah. I mean, think about that. You used to have the time to make that graph.
I mean, there was a time when flexible dieting started, and the goal was everyone was on the internet trying to make the most visually appealing meals. And I was just over here eating like turkey and rice because I was like, I got time for this.
I feel like when it started, it was, at least from my perspective, it was literally about how much crap you can eat and still like get lean and get stage lean. And like, who was it? Alberto Nunez was the Pop-Tart guy, right? Because he has this like ridiculous metabolism anyways. And so it was this weird challenge. And I think that it just like went too far in the other direction in terms of what it should be. And now I feel like we've gotten back to, probably what works best and what is going to support health as much as possible.
Yeah, I think so. Dr. Joe, is the one that came up with the term flexible dieting. If you guys aren't familiar with Joe Klimczewski, and I'm sure he coached Alberto. I know Alberto, Lane, they're all very tied together. Myself, that's like when I got started. So yeah, the Pop-Tart thing, I actually started eating Pop-Tarts as a pre-workout because of Dr. Joe, because he wrote an article in a fitness magazine, how they were the perfect pre-workout snack because of their high carb, easy to digest, low fat. So yeah, I think Alberto, I still remember being jealous of his metabolism. He was like 160 pounds and he was dieting on like 300-400 carbs.
Yeah.
So, it made me feel like I was doing something wrong. Now I just realized like we're all a little bit different.
He was not carb sensitive at all.
No. And so that's a good segue into our topic today. So we're going to talk about strategies for losing body fat, how to break through stalls, how to break through plateaus. Non-traditionally, I think anyone that's followed us for any number of years probably knows where this is going. But I think, Steven, what you and I have to realize is that there are new people getting into the sport, new audience. And so the information is still not common.
I don't even think it's just that, because there's definitely like new people, but I think there's also a lot of people that have been, in the sport of bodybuilding or, into physique enhancement, whatever, for years and years. But they're still, maybe they even haven't seen it or they haven't heard enough to like help them to actually believe it. And I think those people, because man, how bad does it suck if you feel like prep has to be 2 hours of stairs a day and 800 calories?
I think there's a part of people that thinks that sucks. And there's also a part of people that like to suffer because of they get to talk about how much they're suffering. So I see both sides of it because I've had clients that almost were uncomfortable with how comfortable prep was.
Right. Me too.
So yeah, they're like, I'm not suffering. I'm like, yeah, but you dropped 2 pounds this week, but I feel fine. But that's the
great. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So
it's weird. You almost have to like work some people out of that mindset of just because you feel worse doesn't mean you're getting better results.
Exactly. It's the prep. Like nothing makes me laugh more when people are like, we're going to war, we're going to battle, we're grinding. It's like you're eating less and doing a little cardio. Calm down. Calm down.
Being somebody that takes part in I don't know, I guess martial arts, jujitsu, grappling, those kind of things, which still isn't a real fight. Let's be honest here. It cracks me up, man. Because it is and I get it, you're working hard. It's a mindset, like you're having to push, and mentally it's a bitch, but it's not the same thing, like the going to war thing. Um, and
Yeah.
and I think that delineation actually, I think it does people a disservice in a lot of cases because it gets you into that habit of I'm just going to work harder, um, even if it sucks, because that's what it is, instead of necessarily. And you might need to work harder, but the real goal should be to work smarter.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think some people in this sport think you can always just outwork your problems. And what we're going to talk about today is our solutions to things where you can't outwork. You
Yep.
can't lower cardio, add cardio, lower calories, do 7 days a week, like do more and get a result. Like there is a point of diminishing returns or even negative returns. And so that's what we're going to talk about because, um, especially, as people are getting into contest prep season, we're going to start to see people taking approaches that, especially in the bodybuilding world,
Yeah.
people just accept that it's going to be hard. And so they do stupid things because their coaches are stupid. So they go, oh, well, this coach knows what they're doing because they've done it before. And if you don't know the history, like the thing is, Stephen and I have been at this for a better part of a decade. We've seen the same scenario play out with the same coaches, different people over the years. So we know where things are going. Um, but if you're new to the sport, you just see like, oh, this new athlete. You don't know about the other 200 athletes that this person has wrecked. Um, so what we're going to talk about is some evidence-based stuff around nutrition, some strategies that are still probably definitely ahead of the science, especially in regards to what we do as prep coaches,
Yeah.
but also really apply to lifestyle people.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I refer to myself as an evidence-based coach, right? When you look at best practices, it's not only looking at the research, it's also looking at, empirical data, evidence of what's being done in the field, so in our industry, to garner the best results, and then blending those two things into the an approach that kind of makes the best out of what we have, at least currently, in terms of uh, information to get the best results. And man, it's just the hard part for me also is it's like not only do these things have an impact on whether or not you get lean enough and what you look like on stage and how that impacts you, but it also ends up having a huge impact on what comes after the stage. Um, and then, the rest of your bodybuilding career, because if you put on 40 pounds after a show, you, man, it just became significantly harder for you to continue to compete again after that without dealing with that appropriately. And so it's not even just that immediate of how do we get the most out of prep? How do we make this the most beneficial experience so that at the end of that experience, it's successful for what you wanted in terms of your competitive goals, but also now, how do we plan that to where after this one show or this one season, how do we continue that same mindset of what's going to be best for your competitive long-term goals and how do we support that? And man, I have not seen a single person where just grind yourself into the ground has ever been the right answer.
Listen, there are definitely periods of coaching where I've had to do that. Like, okay, like we're going into a Olympia, we're going into something that's, one and done, life or death, basically. You do what you got to do, but you do it armed with the knowledge of, okay, this is how we're going to approach it and this is how we're going to come out of it. And you plan as best you can. I think one of the great transitions for me as a coach was, I used to have a sense of I didn't have control. after my clients competed. It was very much, I want to say it was like 50-50 and maybe even 60-40 in the amount of people that post show were miserable. They couldn't control their eating. They had more body fat than they wanted. They wanted to start a little cut again after because they put on so much body fat quickly. Some of the things we're going to talk about today, the fat loss approaches, nutritional, cardio, things like that. I would say I have less than a 5% occurrence of people that struggle post show now. And that makes me happy as a coach. And almost all the people that struggle post show, I picked up middle of the season and they were already running to the ground. And I'm just trying to help them hang on. But when the damage is done, the floodgates open. And we'll talk a little about what that means. So let's dig into the term evidence-based for nutrition. And if you're listening to this and you're in prep, you're probably going to hear some numbers that you go, oh man, I'm doing different than that. That's not a problem necessarily, as long as you're having a conversation around it.
Yep.
And, as long as it's maybe a short-term reason for things. But yeah, we'll get into a little bit of the nutrition first, then we'll talk about, I think, some strategies around refeeds, diet breaks, cardio modalities, and length of prep and things like that. So let's start with protein. That's the most, it's the most overused macronutrient.
For sure. And I think it's because, what we see with protein is it's a more complex molecule. And so when you're talking about the thermic effect of food, protein's still 4 calories, but your body has to use more energy to break it down into those useful calories for energy. So it has the highest thermic effect. So because it has to break it down from a whole protein down into amino acids, and then it has to take those amino acids and then make them into glucose to use as energy, it's very easy to overeat on protein and not see fat gain on it, right? And there are some other benefits of it. And I think the more that the research kind of gets into it, it's maybe not necessarily a bad idea to even be a little bit over a gram per pound of body weight or proposed stage weight, right? When you're in a prep and dieting phase, because it may help to attenuate or minimize muscle loss throughout the process. But I mean, when I see, and I've seen, women who are going to be 110 pounds on stage eating 180 grams of protein a day, I'm just like, woof, how's that digestion feel?
Well, I also think of it, I used to just think of it as like, well, it's a lot of protein, it's fine. But ultimately, if you're trying to create a caloric deficit, you're wasting some of that caloric intake on the benefits that you would get from carbs or fats eating more protein, right? So and when people talk about, the 40 grams per meal, I think what most people don't understand is that's where like the anabolic benefit is capped. You can still digest all the protein, right? There's other uses for it.
Maybe, because remember, we do have that 100-gram protein study
Right.
that's now challenging that thought.
I'm just proposing that there is if you are 110 pounds and I mean, what's the RDA? 80 grams of protein, 70? Really?
Yeah, probably around that.
Right. So let's say you're at 110, 120. Is 180 better than 120 for the benefits of anabolism?
Yeah, I would say no. Really what we're looking for in terms of like proteins in a single meal, like how much protein do we get? One, we have to have the idea that it's a complete protein, which means it has all of the essential amino acids. So any kind of animal protein, whey protein, pea protein isolate, fish, all that stuff's good. And so what we're looking at there is it has to be, it depends on your body mass or your weight. So if a female has 105-pound stage weight, probably 27, 28 grams of protein is more than enough in a meal to trigger muscle growth nutritionally, right? For a guy, they're going to have a heavier, lean body mass. They're going to need more. 40 is a lot.
Right.
I tell most people, if you're getting 30 grams of protein in a meal, like you're probably pretty damn safe. Because realistically, half of whether or not you're making muscle, losing muscle, or just staying stable in terms of your muscularity is just that net protein balance. And half of it is, all right, how much are we growing which is, your training and then your protein intake.
Yeah. So red flag number one, if you're on a fat loss plan and your protein is approaching anywhere near double your body weight, even 1.5 times your body weight is pretty extreme.
Hey,
But 1 to 1.5 is probably the sweet spot. What's that?
you remember how much protein I was eating when we first met?
Were you doing like 400 or something
I was
ridiculous?
eating 400 grams of protein a day. It was
I
sucked
mean,
so bad.
how are those farts? Solid?
Um, oh, everybody knew me as the chicken and broccoli guy for sure, and hot sauce.
Oh, and broccoli. Were you counting the broccoli in the protein?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay. Okay. Because I've seen some meal plans that are like, chicken, this is the protein, and then the broccoli, this is how much carbs. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not counting the fat from the chicken, you're not counting the protein from the broccoli, type
yeah,
of thing.
yeah. No, but I mean, I was what, 180 pounds back then still, so I was eating
Oh
over
yeah,
double
no,
my
listen,
body weight. Woof.
I have, having just moved, I found all my bodybuilding magazines. I've kept every one that I've ever bought. I still have the diet that I did in like, 1999 of 350 grams of protein a day. And that was, I mean, I was not making a ton of money at that time. That was a lot of money on chicken, eggs, protein powder, milk. I mean, I was eating around the clock to hit that number and I felt like ass.
Yeah, same. I was in college and working full time.
Turns out those guys in those magazines were doing something other than 350 grams of protein. But, when you're searching for answers and you're like, wow, why does Ronnie Coleman look like that? Oh, that's why he's eating 350 grams of protein. I'm only eating 180. Let's double it up. Here we go.
That's totally it. You got him.
That's it. No, nothing about genetics. No drugs. It's all. So so first of all, if you are on a fat loss plan and you are just trying to overeat on protein, cut it out. Cut it out. I think you might even feel better. Digestion might improve. But you can also save some room for the other macronutrients. I think the next one we'll talk about is fat. And
Yeah.
that's actually one of the more scary ones because you and I see this all the time. No fat diets.
Ugh. Hate it. Hate it. I'm amazed at how many people don't recognize that fats are important for a plethora of things. And there have been some like really interesting things. Like apparently a very, very obese individual was put on literally just water or essentially an IV, no food, and was losing weight real crazy. But I mean, I think it's also important for us to recognize that when we look at the research and the science, like some of it can be applicable, but we're not dealing with, in terms of prep, people that are, 400 pounds plus. We're dealing with athletes, people that are extremely active. They're not sedentary.
Are you referring to the English guy who had no food for an entire year? That
Yeah,
because I quote that all the time on my YouTube channel. So yeah, there was a gentleman who was obese. He under medical advisement, he fasted for an entire year. All he had was water and minerals. So just so you guys know, you can't just drink water. You have to have like sodium, potassium, some minerals and stuff. So he did
yeah.
not consume calories, in the form of food for a year. And I think once he reached his ideal weight, which was like 180 pounds after a year, then he had like a piece of bread, like because obviously his stomach was screwed up.
Oh my God.
Augustus Barbieri. If you guys are not familiar, his name was Augustus. That's the name that popped in my head just now. So yeah, fasting, your body's breaking down all that body fat as energy reserve, as fuel. But we're not just trying to lose body fat. We're trying to keep muscle, build
Right.
muscle, and once we get the body fat off, be in a position to not have the crazy rebound.
Yeah, and like there's obviously things like vitamin A, D, E, and K, which are all fat soluble, right? So you have to have fats and lipids available to utilize those. Um, I think what a lot of other people also fail to recognize is all of your cells, they have a lipid barrier, right? So that's fats that are super important with that. They also make a big impact on digestion. I mean, how many times have you seen that maybe fats are on the lower end of the spectrum and we use a free meal like something that's high fat, like a burger, and fries, and all of a sudden they're like, Coach, I just had the best BM in months. just
Oh
like
yeah.
things
Well,
move.
if you, like you just said, certain minerals and vitamins are only fat soluble. So if they're not present, are they just passing through? Are they just going slow? Like they're just not getting absorbed? It's obviously not ideal.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're having, so like red flag number two, I mean, let's talk numbers, Stephen, because you and I talk about this all the time. Let's talk about the range for fat intake.
So it's different for males and females. Like for males, if your fats are too high, it can actually negatively impact things like testosterone production. But generally speaking, around 20% of total calories from fats is where I like to be at. And for me, I have a pretty, I won't even say pretty, I have a diamond level hard bottom end for females of like 35 grams a day on fats. And I'll be honest, I don't even like getting to that most of the time. I tend to be, I think, more willing to do extra, say, let's do extra cardio, let's get extra steps, let's get extra movement. Um, or maybe even, okay, we can try and bring carbs down a little bit more depending where we're at to facilitate things moving. But I don't like going below that. And I'll say this, ever since, and I don't think there was a time where I ever really went too much beyond that anyways, maybe earlier on in my career. But ever since, I mean, people just haven't had the same kind of problems. Um,
Right.
digestion tends to be better. Um, just overall, we don't have the same blowback after the diet's done. It just, I've seen way better results in the long term from it.
Yeah, and I've always believed that, especially, for men, where I start to get nervous is around 45, 50. For women, 35, 40. And I've done lower fat approaches in an attempt to go, okay, we've got a couple days, let's see what happens. And oftentimes it does work, but understanding that for natural athletes, all of our hormones are derived from, our nutritional intake. So if you're not getting, you can see some really weird things start to happen. I've had clients come to me from, coaches that had them on under 10 grams of fat for an extended period of time, some as long as 6 months. Their hair was falling out, their nails were brittle. I mean, obviously loss of your cycle, digestive issues, which,
Yeah, just malnourished.
yeah, you hear about these things and you go, oh, it's prep. And I hate when people say that. No, it's not prep. It's the approach that you took in prep. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, so if you are below, listen, if you're at the beginning stages of prep and you're below 20% of your total calories, or below, for a woman, 40 grams of fat and for a man, 50 grams of fat, you better ask why, because your next meal plan that you get, because usually the people that are on this low of fat and this high of protein, they're on meal plans that were written for somebody else, or have just been kind of copy pasted, handed around to the whole team. They'll typically have 10, 15, 20 grams of fat on the meal plan. So plug it in. Don't put your head in the sand and just be like, oh, this is what my coach wants me to do. Plug it into an app. That's like, so when Steven and I, all the coaches at Pro Physique, when we have a consult with someone and someone's like, yeah, I've been on this meal plan, I say, okay, well, go, cool, go plug it in. It takes you 5 seconds nowadays.
Yeah.
And let's see where your numbers are.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing too, because I can't tell you how many meal plans that will list macros or list total calories. And when you actually plug it in, like what they say you're getting is not what you're getting.
Right.
I'm like, oh, this doesn't match up. Like, and sometimes it'll even be like wild numbers. You're like, oh yeah, I'm on this many calories. And you look at the meal plan, you're like, there's no way. There's no way you're on
Right.
that many calories. That doesn't add up.
Yep. Yep. So this is where, I get it. You hired a coach, you trust your coach, but take a little bit of personal accountability. And something that I've had so many people say to me on a phone call, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong. I knew I should have asked questions. And guys, if you want, Steven, myself, the coaches at Pro Physique, you can send us direct messages and emails and we'll keep everything confidential. We just like to share and help. Um, because not only have we had success at the highest level of the sport, our athletes are healthy, right? And so that's really, I would not do what I do if I felt like I was getting people on stage and wrecking them. That wouldn't be a good wouldn't be a
Yeah.
good outcome for me.
Yeah, you don't want to do it at anyone's detriment. And I think, most of us, maybe somebody doesn't feel the way I feel about this, but I feel like we all do. Like I want to help people. Like the entire point of me getting into contest prep coaching was because I got into the sport kind of in 2013 around that time when like Lane was coming up and the evidence in the science-based community was coming up. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this than just telling people to eat a grapefruit and eggs whites every morning and a salad with only olive oil and red wine vinegar, or not even red wine vinegar, apple cider vinegar, like because of they're somehow special. Like there's got to
Sounds
be a
like you
more
had a meal
sustainable
plan,
way.
Stephen.
Oh my God. Um, yeah, it's just it's well, and I get it. People are afraid of fats because, like, well, if you eat fat, you get fat. And yes, like when we talk about protein having the highest thermogenic effect of food, fat has pretty much none. It's very easy.
Right.
But, like I said, all of your sex hormones are cholesterol derivative. Yeah, your liver makes a lot of the majority of the cholesterol that you're going to get, but it also still has to have the underlying stuff available. And especially as you start getting lean, your body starts doing some weird shit sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't avoid fat. And in fact, some of my favorite preps, I've been able to keep, a female's, fats over 50, 60 grams, through, what we'll talk about as increasing activity. Um, I've become increasingly a fan of that and seen much better outcomes with doing more cardio, which can be a bad word, but I don't think it should be, versus, you know, getting those, threshold calories to the point where like you're basically starving. Um, I'd much rather eat more and move more. So yeah,
Which is
fats.
weird because there's so many people that would disagree with you on it. Like, no, no, no. The way to increase or to improve body composition and lose body fat is just by dieting. Exercise alone is not enough. I'm like,
Listen, I've tried it every way. I can guarantee you, I will not get as lean sitting here and eating super low calories as I will getting up, doing some cardio. I will not get as lean. Um, it's also mentally more enjoyable for me to feel like I'm working.
yep,
So, I mean, our bodies are designed to burn fat for fuel at low intensities. So, and what I learned in my early preps was I don't even get hungry anymore in prep like I used to. When I used to do high intensity cardio sessions, 2 to 3 days a week, and before anybody here says like I do hit, no, you don't. No. I was taught to do hit cardio during the time when there was a lot of research being done on true all out sprints on these death bikes where they would speed you up, drop the weight, and you would basically spin your bike with resistance to failure, which would last about 10 seconds.
yep,
Um, those type of like almost vomiting cardio was proposed to be the most effective way to lose fat because yeah, you burn a lot more calories in a shorter amount of time. But what wasn't recognized back then was that yeah, you burn a lot of calories in those 30 minutes that you're doing sprints, but the rest of the day you're wrecked
yep.
and you're starving and you're cold. And I no longer have that because we've figured some things out. So we'll get into that a little bit. But and this is the benefit of been doing this a long time. It's
Let's
funny
hit
you said
carbs before we get
when
into.
Lane was coming up in 2013. I reached out to Lane in 2007 from bodybuilding.com. So he was doing this stuff with Dr. Joe and that group long time ago. Um, but again, anytime you introduce something new, there's a normal like, oh, everyone's on a meal plan. Then it was like, oh, you should only be on macros. You should only be eating ice cream and whey protein. Same thing happened with cardio. Oh, you shouldn't do any cardio. You should just do sprints 3 days a week, 4 days a week. Um,
I mean, they did the same thing with steps too. They're like not counting steps as cardio, which I get. I like to make the delineation because of intensity levels and thresholds. But like, if you're doing friggin' 20,000 steps a day, you're doing cardio. Like that's still cardio.
First of all, anybody out there that's prescribing 10,000 steps today to their clients, like that's normal, that is 2 hours of walking. I tracked it the other day. My kids have soccer. So I was at soccer. I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a timer on and I'm literally just going to walk and count in my head. I was shocked
Yeah.
after walking for an hour. I was like, wow, that is a lot of steps. Like
Yeah.
I had a lot more walking to do. So I really don't give my clients 10,000 steps anymore. I give my clients 5 to 7,000 as like a baseline. And if they have a job where they're getting 15 or 20, I'm probably not going to give them cardio.
Yeah, so I normally just try and keep it stable. So whatever they're at when they come to me, especially if we're going into a diet, I'm like, all right, well, we can't go below this because this is expenditure. And so we have to do stuff other than that. But if I'm more than happy if somebody's at like 7,000, 6,000 steps a day. I don't have a problem with that. You know, the problem is a lot of people come to us already dipping their toe in the diet pool. And so, you know,
So I
you
remember when I
deal
when
with
I
it.
first got a Fitbit, I was working at home. It was when I bought that first house in Tampa, Stephen. And I had one son. Sloan was a baby at the time. And so I started tracking my steps. I would literally go to the office to work, drive to Powerhouse to train, come back to the office to work. I was averaging like 3,000 steps a day.
Yeah, it's sad how inactive I can be with the fact that I'm a friggin' coach.
Yeah. This is I am chained to this seat sometimes 10, 12 hours a day.
Yep.
Um, and listen, I've worked in construction, I've worked in restaurants. Stephen was a waiter too. Like we know what it's like to grind. That's why we work so hard. But I tell you what, it was really easy to stay lean when I was a server.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so before we get too far off, let's hit carbs just so that we can
Yeah.
round out the macros because you know I touched on it earlier. Like half of how much you are gaining, losing, or keeping in terms of your muscle is protein synthesis or growing. The other half is how much you break down. And like in terms of macronutrients, carbohydrates is the only one that helps you to break down less muscle protein throughout the day to help with that overall balance, net balance of how much muscle we have.
So like in scientific terms, they call it protein sparing.
Right. So it is protein sparing, which a lot of people use for the argument of keto. But keto's a different story. I don't want to get into that. We'll be all day on this at this point. Um, so yes, it helps you to break down less protein throughout the day, which means you keep more muscle.
Yeah, I think carbohydrates probably get the worst rap of all the macronutrients, especially right now with the like the carnivore keto. Lane likes to use the word zealots. I always think of it like this: like, listen, if someone put me on a keto diet and I lost 100 pounds, or a carnivore diet and I lost 100 pounds, I'd probably be shouting from the rooftops too. But what almost
Mhm.
every single person that I've seen do keto or carnivore do is once they lose a little bit of weight, they go, "Oh yeah, this is not sustainable." They want to get back to a diet that includes carbohydrates um, because of the benefits. So my favorite phrase is that fat burns in a carbohydrate flame. And I say that mostly because I just don't want people to think people have this opinion now that if you eat carbs, you store it immediately as fat and it stops all fat burning and the fat fairy comes and puts extra fat on your body and it's under the pillow at night. Whereas I'm a big believer in carbs make the process better when used properly.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a couple reasons. And Dr. Joe will quote some research that says that the decrease that you get in thyroid hormone from low carbohydrates or dieting isn't enough to really have a vast impact on overall metabolic rate. And even if that's the case, I think there is a very you can't overlook this idea that at a certain point, like things are either therapeutic or non-therapeutic. So if you drop below the kind of threshold to where now you feel like ass all the time and you don't want to move and you don't want to get up and everybody knows I talk with my hands a lot and now I'm not talking with my hands as much anymore and I don't get up to change like even if your like basal metabolic rate didn't change that much, your activity and what your output has changed has been so significant that it's going to have a pretty big impact. And I think that's where a lot of people I don't honestly very normally cut people under 100 grams of carbs a day anymore. Because I just feel like the blowback from it, like the juice ain't worth the squeeze, so to speak, right? I might for some people where, yeah, maybe our back's against the wall, we got to make a show happen, and it's short term, and we'll push for a few days, and then we'll pull back with some higher carb days and refeeds to help with recovery. Um, but for the most part, I found like if you go too hard on carbs, like the rest of it suffers so much, it tends to not be worth it.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I have a hard number of 10 times body weight. So, or body weight, sorry, not 10 times body weight, but like, so if I have a 150-pound athlete and their carbs are getting below 150, that's where I'm going to introduce some higher carb days, um, and really start to pay attention to their strength and their performance in the gym. But yeah, the carbohydrates for me, that has been, I guess, one of the things that kind of our approach is known for is we are going to keep carbohydrates in. I'm never gonna do a zero carb or gosh, I don't even see the point in doing like 50 or 60 carbs a day where you're getting into like you could be in ketosis if your numbers are right. Um, because then you just start to feel like crap all the time. You get that keto flu. So yeah, again, and this is where I'd go, okay, so Steven, we got a person on 100 carbs. We want to drop them to 75. That's 25 grams of carbs, which is 100 calories. I'd rather have them just burn 100 calories from training, from cardio, from NEAT, than pull away that 25 grams of carbs can be a nice meal to end the day.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, if you're thinking about 100 calories and you only have 400 calories worth of carbohydrates in the first place, my brain goes to, okay, well, what are we doing, quote unquote, wrong that we can improve upon instead of just trying to starve you into submission more?
Right.
Because it also carbohydrates will impact how T4 is converted to T3. Like, so we can see that on low carbohydrate diets, that conversion to the active form of thyroid hormone can be negatively impacted as well, within the cell. So I think there's just more considerations, and now that we have more of this information to say, all right, well, the problem most of the time likely isn't just, okay, we need to be lower calorie and lower carbs when we're at these pretty aggressive um, approaches, you know. And so aggressive for me, if yes, body weight and carbs is one. You could look at total calories, may or may not be as good, especially like if you have that really crazy high protein that we talked about earlier, but 10 times your body weight or projected stage weight in calories, I'm like, that's bare bones. That's teensy weensy calories.
Yeah.
Those are numbers where I'm concerned about.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's where. So we will talk a little bit about what we do when we have to get to those places. Because listen, we're gonna do what we got to do. We're gonna make sure the goal for the athlete is to get on stage. Sometimes we're trying to protect them from themselves, but we still want them to win. And these are conversations that we do have. So yeah, listen, the goal here is to give you guys some tools to just make sure that your approach is sound. And the one thing that I think about with carbohydrates is I think a lot of times people think of carbohydrates as something other than they are, such as like, oh, I don't eat donuts, I don't eat pizza, I don't eat because, carbs and those foods have more calories from fat, right? So there are some really good options for carbohydrates that aren't going to put you in a caloric surplus if you plan them right. And this is where we get into like the air quotes clean eating foods.
yeah.
And again, this is where, when we talk about flexible dieting, got a little too flexible there. People were just engineering foods that had crazy macro ratios to say they were eating ice cream, but they end up eating, a gallon of erythritol a night.
Woof. Woof digestion. Woof.
Right.
That's the other thing. And so like when people don't count fibers as carbs, like I'm a total carb, not a net carb guy. So you need like some semblance of carbohydrates within your diet for micronutrient density and intake so that you can be healthy and have what you need, to make energy and do the things and to live life.
Well, and
So,
speaking of healthy, like a lot of people use this term insulin sensitivity. I don't have any clients I have one right now that I would expect her to have a higher carb total for what we have to do to get her lean. I suspect there's some underlying health issues that are the cause. However, insulin sensitivity can actually be created and exacerbated by low carb dieting or no carb dieting.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean that's the thing, because I think what everybody wants is this idea that they're not sensitive to carbohydrates and right? Um, but what that would mean is that you ate a fuck ton of carbohydrates all the time. Because that's the only way that you're going to be insensitive to it, is by
Right.
being like, okay, cool, it just doesn't bother me. It's like, I have dogs. My house smells like dogs sometimes. Or I walk by the cat litter box. Guess what? I'm kind of dead into that because there's more of it in my life I'm less sensitive. If I had none of it and I walked into somebody's house and had that wonderful scent, I'd be like, oh wow, I'm really sensitized to that. I very much so notice it. Um, so it's this weird dynamic of people are afraid of carbohydrates when what they want comes from a higher carbohydrate diet.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is take someone who's like, yeah, my last coach said I'm insulin sensitive. I can't have carbs. And I'd be like, okay. And after like 3 months, I have them over 200 carbs and they're leaner. And they're like, I don't get it. I'm like, yeah, no, it was your last coach that did not get it. Carbohydrates are our muscles' preferred fuel source. Like, so you take carbohydrates. I mean, listen, you want to look good in the gym? Taking a bunch of carbs and some sodium and go work out. Like
Yeah.
you are going to look and feel better. Um, so yeah, don't. I'm not suggesting that everybody can have 500 grams of carbs in prep, but it's something that if you are on a meal plan, and this is again where we talk about this evidence-based approach, the two sides of that coin are you either have people that are like the bros, like this is what the pros do, this is what everybody does, and you get a meal plan and it's, if you put it in a food tracker, you go, okay, I'm on 200 protein, 60 carb and 9 fat. That's going to be problems, big problems. And that's all we're saying is just pay attention and make sure like you're not fearing carbohydrates because they are fat burning fuel, muscle building fuel. They support your hormones. I mean, guys, you want a good thyroid, you want to not have hormone issues, have a nice balanced approach. This is why it's called evidence based because the research backs it up.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more of it and more people seeing success with it. Like, wasn't it? You were telling me Ryan Terry was like, I started doing what I normally do going into shows, and I felt better and looked better. You know,
Yeah.
and of course, all of our clients are great examples of that. My favorite is when not even when you have to peak somebody, but literally when we're just reversing into shows. Like it's the easiest.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, I just had 6 girls do the Arnold. They all placed very well. They all looked the best they've ever looked. They all had their tie-ins and their cores were tight. I think the day before the show, the lowest was probably Lisa, who's 105, 6 pounds, and she was on 200 grams of carbs.
yeah.
So like, and she was dropping weight. Um, yeah, carbohydrates are wonderful. I mean, that's the fun place to be when you can reverse someone once they're lean. That's a whole other conversation. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
human body, when it's stage lean and you can actually bring food up to off-season levels and stay that lean, that is a whole other conversation, but it's quite common now at this point with us. And that's another thing I learned from Dr. Joe. Or just from myself. Every time I ever did multiple shows, I'm like, man, why do I look so much better at my second and third show? It's because I was having those recovery weeks and diet breaks and going out to eat after the show and then getting back to prep. So I guess that's where we'll go next is I still have a lot of consultations with people that are like, yeah, I've been on, 80 carbs and 25 fat for 6 months. That's their prep. So I'm like, oh, like, do you get high days? No. Do you get refeed days? No. Wow. I'm like, wow, good for you, first of all. But
Respect? Question mark?
yeah, so let's talk about when we introduce the refeed day. Let's define it, refeed day, and then let's talk about when we introduce it.
Yeah, and I think you and I differ on this because I think I tend to include them maybe a little bit earlier, um, just because, man, uh, I normally see most of my clients start struggling with the hunger, and so we get to like I don't know, maybe anywhere near under 150 carbs for my females, sometimes even 160. I'm like, all right, cool. Depending on what you normally are at, I'll include a couple of high days. I don't really tend to use the single refeed as much anymore. Um, I've really kind of, I think, gotten more comfortable with like 2, maybe sometimes 3 day a week refeeds, depending on the person that are a little bit less aggressive. Um, and so it's normally around that mid hundreds that I'm introducing those refeeds for people just to kind of stay on the safe side. Um, some of them I might be a little bit less inclined to if they feel really good. Like, yeah, I'm performing really well in the gym. My energy levels are great. Because some people just like the truth of it is they just got to diet harder, it's not as easy for them. So
I have
if they're
someone at my
still feeling
door.
good, are we what?
You carry the conversation. I'm going to mute myself. There's someone at my door.
Oh God. All right. So like Some people, they just have to diet harder and they feel good. And so there's certain numbers that I look at and I'm like, okay, these are probably where we need to be more aware of this, to be proactive about putting you in the gutter and just like, making you feel like crap. Other people, maybe they do feel really good still, and we can push a little bit harder before we get into those refeed numbers or the diet breaks. So for me, the biggest thing that I'm looking for is, do we need refeeds? Do we need diet breaks? Is how the athlete's looking. Do we still have good performance? Is our fatigue level super high? Are we moody? Has our libido dropped significantly, right? That biofeedback stuff. Because that, there's no getting around that. Those are pretty strong indicators of, okay, we need to relook at what we're doing in terms of how we're managing the physiological stress of prep. Um, and then that's a hard line. Like I said, even around that mid 150s, the mid 100s, that's where I probably tend to put in some higher carb days and just try and start looking a little bit more at the recovery aspect of things.
Yeah, anytime I have to get the carbs on a daily basis below their weight, I'm definitely having at least one refeed a week, if not two. Um, I tend to wait until the momentum of prep because at this point, I'm trying to start my athletes at prep with a really solid number of carbs. But what I've found is that, let's say I have a 125-pound competitor and they're starting prep. Let's say their off season, they were on 320 carbs. Even if I drop their carbs by 50, they might not lose weight that week, right? So what I find is that you got to be a little more aggressive with calories early on. And I also find that if I add refeeds in early on, it also will stall the progress the first couple of weeks. So I try to wait until the momentum is quite good. Like you said, where hunger signals are picking up, the complaints, the one thing we do with our check-ins with the wellness scores, I like to know where their hunger's at. When I notice it's ticking up, last week was a 3, next week was a 4, next week is a 5. Okay, probably a good idea to start adding some high days in, and that's when you typically get a better response from it. When A, it's well received because they're hungry, but B, they're already seen so much progress, they're not afraid of it. Because yeah, I typically I think we can perform pretty well on lower carbs. Like, I've experimented on myself below 200 carbs and been like, wow, I'm actually fine. I'm actually fine at 150 carb for a day or two. And then you wake up and you go, oh dear Lord, like I'm ravenous. So, right. So like it, I think we can do well. We can refill up, and that's the nice thing about the refeed. Physiologically, it's good for the muscles to get refilled, but
Yeah.
psychologically, it's good to go, cool. I just got to go 2 more days and I get a refeed.
I remember my last prep when like I finally was like, hey man, all right, I'm not being objective with this anymore. You mind giving me some feedback? You're like, yeah, maybe stop being such a little bitch and cut your carbs under 380 a day.
Yeah, you were eating a ton of food, and that's the hard part. Like that's the hard part about prepping yourself is like, you know, I think last time I handed stuff off to Dr. Joe, he was like, "Oh, you're actually not eating enough some days." I'm like, "Oh." So
Yeah.
he made me add refeeds in because I was just trying to grind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's funny how like, especially even with ourselves, like the difference in personality can impact how we approach things. And I think it's funny, you know.
yeah, and different phases of prep too. Like there's different
Hmm.
aspects, and the thing about prepping yourself is that you're in your own head every minute of every day. So your decision making can be impacted by how you're feeling in a certain moment. Whereas a coach, we're separated from that.
Yeah.
Like we don't know when our clients are having a bad moment. Oh, they feel tired. Oh, they feel hungry. Oh, they feel great. So when they check in, we're getting a full snapshot of the week. And I think that's a better approach. Um, I've known a few people that could objectively prep themselves and be very successful, like Brian Whitaker, but
Hmm.
not many.
Yeah. I normally get, once I start getting around 10 pounds over stage weight, I start being less objective. I'm pretty
Yep.
good up until that point, but
Yeah, I
I think
think
that's normal.
that's the funny thing about losing body fat is that the first half you're like, wow, I'm looking better. And then the last half, all you see are the problem areas. You only see the fat on your lower back or on your quad that won't go away. You don't
Yeah.
see every other striation in your body. I mean, we all have had this moment where we took a picture in prep and thought, oh, fuck, I look terrible. And then you look at it 6 months later and you think, what was I thinking?
But I don't look too bad. I look pretty good
Yeah,
here.
like why didn't I take more pictures? Like why didn't I take more videos? I always every prep I think that. I've
Yeah.
gotten better at it over the years because yeah, I think the more times you prep, you learn from it. You learn like, okay, don't get too caught up in the moment.
It's the
Um,
same for me. Throughout the years, you've gotten better at taking more pictures of me when I'm in prep.
yeah, I got a lot of videos and pictures of you on my phone from your last prep.
Yeah.
Because I felt like you weren't doing enough of it. I was like, damn, you're looking amazing.
Yeah, I hate
Um,
doing that shit. You know me.
so the next step from a refeed is when those start to lose effectiveness. And this is where we can talk about how to break through plateaus.
Yep.
Okay. Calories are bottomed out. We'll say they're around 10 times body weight, with a refeed or two per week. Cardio is, we're probably in the hour or more,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even doing a couple days of double cardio. And we stall, and the next adjustment comes, and now we're doing a little more cardio and a little less calories, and nothing happens. And so this is where panic can set in. Um, some people will say, I can't handle this prep. Um, and we all know it. You feel helpless. You're like, man, I'm doing more. And it doesn't. And this is where also people will be like, mathematically, that's impossible. The laws of thermodynamics dictate that if you eat less and move more, you should lose body fat. But the laws of thermodynamics can't account for, well, they obviously can, but we can't account for the changes that are happening dynamically to our hormones, to our, like you said, non-exercise activity.
Right.
I mean, looking back at past preps, I very much remember just completely giving up on things that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I'm really tired, so I'm just going to stop walking the dog. I'm going to stop playing ping pong. I'm going to stop playing basketball. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? That's a bunch of activity that you've then got to make up for.
Yeah. I think people also don't recognize like pushing that hard is a ton of stress. So, we don't tend to realize that the body, whether it's mental or physical stress, it's still stress. And so we're adding a lot of stress going into that too. And so, then if we're not responding and things suck, it's even more stress. And so having the ability to be like, okay, well, let's help manage that also. And I think this is a big part of it because, yes, there's impacts in terms of the underlying hormones and how those are impacted. And, things like testosterone and thyroid hormone and all that fun stuff. But it's also this idea that, oh, shit, imagine if we take a diet break for a week and we come back up to um, maintenance calories, which won't be where you started prep, obviously. But, maybe instead of just doing refeeds all week, right? And then cutting cardio down and saying, okay, I want you to really recover. And if we need to, let's even deload it and reduce training volume and intensity a little bit. And now imagine how fucking good you're gonna feel the next week to now you can handle doing the normal things again. And so we're not in that negative kind of place as much mentally because we feel better. We're not in that negative energy balance place where we just don't feel like we can manage anything and we're not doing the things that we normally would do. Um, and we've hopefully made a positive impact on things like your hunger signaling, again, your energy levels and how things underneath the hood are running. And I think that a lot of people just don't appreciate this idea that at a certain point, when you're slamming your head against the wall, you got to turn back around and find another route. And feel like the diet break is essentially that it's taking some steps backwards, adding calories in, decreasing the cardio, and allowing us to go around that roadblock instead of people thinking that there's only one way in and one way out.
Yeah, well, so for those that aren't familiar with the study that was done in Australia or Tasmania many, many years ago, more than a decade now, the acronym was the Matador study, metabolic adaptation through activity, whatever. It's whatever. I don't remember the acronym, but the idea was they took two groups of people through a 16-week dieting phase. One group just dieted in a deficit for 16 weeks straight. The other group dieted for 2 weeks and then intermittently brought calories up to maintenance for 2 weeks. So it took them like 34 weeks to get through the diet because they had all these extra 2 weeks in there. But the group that did the breaks lost more body fat, kept more lean body mass. They did a follow up with them after a year. They kept more body fat off. So the argument was, okay, is this a better way to diet? I think for a typical person, that's a very tough switch to go back and forth every 2 weeks. But for those of us in the contest prep community, at least myself, when I heard this, and I had some pretty good talks with Eric Helms about this again a decade ago in Australia at a seminar. Um, I still remember the first time I gave a client a diet break, thinking, this is crazy, right? And so I actually got pushback. She was a competitor, a very good competitor, and we were doing double cardio, low carbs, low calories, but nothing was happening. And I put her on the diet break. And so let me give an example of what a diet break would look like. Let's say you're on 80 carbs, 35 fat, and 90 minutes of cardio, and whatever, 150 protein. A diet break might be, 130 carb, 45 or 50 fat, and bring the cardio down to 35 or 40 minutes, right? Roughly half, something like that. Immediately, the scale started dropping. All the other things improved. Sleep improved, stress improved, body composition even improved. And so that was my first like aha moment with this approach of, okay, if you take a body of a competitor that's been restricted and they are so motivated and so detailed that they're essentially in a metabolic ward, right? Because like if I tell you, Stephen, if I'm prepping you and I say, hey buddy, add 30 carbs today, I don't worry that you're going to add 50, right? So I think that's the problem, is that it's hard to do this with general population people because they hear the word diet break, they ease off oh, I don't have to prep as much, I'll guesstimate more. No, we are taking athletes that are probably mad that they are eating more, so they're like following it. And I give a little speech like, hey, I need you to follow this plan. This is not a break. This is still prep. I'll say 50% of the time, my athletes that take a diet break drop weight.
Yep.
So,
And like I will sometimes even use them earlier on in prep. So like say I do have one of those really high metabolic individuals, and maybe we were at like 350 carbs in an off season, and now we're down and we're like, all right, well, we're gonna cut down to like 180 at this point, right? Because that's still low for them. Sometimes before I decide to get more aggressive with them, I'll do a diet break to bring calories back up, drop cardio down some, and see if we still get that nice benefit. So even if we don't see them dropping weight, they are almost always maintaining weight within a pound or so. And now psychologically they're ready to push harder too, even.
yeah, oh
Um,
yeah. Well, and that's when things get really interesting, because then you go, I've had this happen many times where I put somebody on a diet break and I cut their cardio in half and they drop weight. And all I do is bring their cardio back up and they keep dropping weight on, 300 more calories a day. Um,
and
Again, the
sometimes
body,
not even that.
yeah, the body is very dynamic. So it's like these things that we see in a textbook or on your little online calculators might not make sense, but when you account for an improvement in sleep is going to have a downstream benefit to your hormones, your thyroid, it's going to have a downstream benefit to your non-exercise activity, you're going to have more energy throughout the day, you might even do your normal cardio session but you burn more calories because you're into it, you're bumping up the speed a little bit. Like little things like that have a profound impact on the body. And this is why the diet break, in my opinion, is the thing that changes the post-show experience so much better. We saw it with the Matador study. The people that took the breaks maintained more fat loss, all the things. They kept more lean body mass. For a competitive bodybuilder, if you're taking a harsh approach, you are losing some lean body mass.
Yep.
You're also developing some eating disorder behaviors. You also have a fear of eating more food, which can then cause you to binge. Whereas if you take a diet break in prep, it's almost like you reset yourself back a few weeks or months metabolically, and psychologically you go, oh, I can eat a little bit more and it's not a bad thing. It doesn't ruin me. So whatever the reason being, multifaceted reasons, the athletes that I see that have the best post show are ones that I've given at least 1 or 2 diet breaks. And that's to include peak week, where we essentially are,
Yep.
pulling the cardio down gradually, bringing the food up gradually, and putting them in a place where they look and feel their best on the day of the show. And, how many times have we heard this after a competitor? Where do you want to eat after the show?
Yeah.
Can I just go back to my room?
Yep.
That's
Yep.
a different mindset than most competitors who have been hoarding snacks and they want to go out and, go crazy.
Yeah, I think my most emphatic experience with diet breaks in the Matador study was I had a client who was an internal medicine doctor. And so she worked 1 week and then had the next week off. So literally we did a Matador style kind of diet where we would diet hard and do cardio on a week off, and then we would come back up to maintenance during the work week the following week, and back and forth, back and forth. And then on top of that, she was also still breastfeeding. Um, and she got on stage at nationals and looked phenomenal. So like it can be done, but I think those kinds of stories are the ones that are necessary for people to understand, like, oh shit, really? Like, how? How did that happen? I'm like, well, we had enough time to do it. We planned appropriately. We didn't give her 8 weeks to get ready because it's going to take twice as long is the thought process. But it's also, if you put your back up against the wall all the time, then it's really even harder and scarier to be like, oh, well, I have extra time to be ready, so I can afford this diet break. And I think that
Yeah.
planning is also super important in it, to where you're not, if you're behind the ball on the entire prep, then it becomes that much more difficult to be able to feel comfortable. And even from our side as coaches, sometimes to feel comfortable with utilizing those things where we're like, I'm going to trust that this is going to make it a good impact, but that, you know, we're we're having a hard
Right.
time with going to make this show.
Yeah. The longer the prep, the more likelihood of success. Um, it's tough to navigate. That's where the weekly check-ins and understanding where the clients are at are so important. Also understanding, the rate of fat loss, how much fat we have left to lose. The very common question I get is, what's my expected stage weight? Or, and without a lot of competition history, that number can vary. You get really good at it over time because you just basically go, yeah, you probably look good at this, so let's drop 5 pounds from that. That's
Yeah.
probably where stage weight's going to be. So, yeah, but the combination of a diet break and a reverse into a show is undefeated for post-show success. Just undefeated. Like, it really just sets the athlete up mentally, physically to be, I think the hardest part is that initial week or two.
Yeah. And I would say I absolutely agree with that when you have them for the entirety of prep. I've gotten some people like 8 or 10 weeks out, and even though we were bringing food up the entire time and we did a linear load, like after prep, because they had dieted so hard and done so much, it unfortunately still doesn't matter because mentally they're going to go off the rails
Yeah.
once the
Yeah.
carrot's off the stick.
You see the signs. You see it when someone's been prepped hard. I had a competitor last year that I picked up. We actually did very well at a regional, did a national show. I was able to reverse her into both. And then when her season ended, it was just binge eating after binge eating after binge eating. And it was like, I almost was just like, we just have to let it happen. You have to let your body repair itself. And I told her, I said, after a year, I'll diet you down and you'll never have this problem again. But you were on such, I think she was on like 800 calories. She was
Ugh.
like 120 pounds, right?
Ugh.
So like it's almost self-defense. I mean, I've had some girls come to me and be like, yeah, I'm working with this coach and I binge eat once a week. And I said, good, you're saving yourself. Like, I understand mentally it's not a good feeling, but those extra thousands of calories that you're getting is keeping you healthier.
Yeah.
So it's obviously not mentally a good thing, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think that matters too. And then the last thing I'll say is probably don't plan a huge vacation right after your show. Definitely not a big surgery or something. You know, like
Or
be
or
aware of
any
that.
fat loss phase. If we're talking about competitors, yeah, the post show is challenging. You know what the best thing to do post show, Steven? I love when someone's like, "Oh yeah, I got a photo shoot next weekend." I'm like,
Yes.
"Cool.
Yeah.
Just get back on that horse without having to like grind anymore, and you're going to do so good." But yeah, it's those all inclusive post shows.
Oof.
I mean, I did it. I
Yeah.
strictly thinking like, "Oh, I'll just no,
Well,
no,
and I think like the truth of it is there are a lot of people who don't get on stage, but who diet just as hard as any competitor.
yep,
And I think that there's this mindset of, well, I'm not as lean as them, so it's not going to affect me the same, or I'm not going to have the same outcome of it. And it's like, no, no, you've still been dieting as hard. So it's important to recognize that it's not necessarily just about where you got to with your body composition or your body weight. It's about the approach that you took, the length of time that you had to do it, whether or not you took breaks, um, and those kind of things. So, even if you're still 30, 40 pounds away from maybe where a competitor would be in terms of their body weight, like you still need to be aware of these things to make sure that, because what's the point if you just put the weight back on again?
100%. Yeah, and that's for me as a coach, that's where I had struggles early in my career feeling like, man, am I actually making these people's lives worse by prepping them? So having these solutions, the evidence-based approach to how much macronutrients, you know, understanding flexibility without turning it into like an all-out war on healthy food, and then proper length of prep, proper approach during prep into the peaking process. You know, not using diuretics, not, making huge changes to sodium and water, things like that. Um, the outcomes have been, you know, I mean, my resume is pretty fucking good, but I wouldn't care if my resume was the greatest of all time if all the people that I worked with were suffering or had to stop competing. Um, I, I'm more happy about the fact that I get to see my competitors, like, you know, someone like Kathy Seitz, who had a pretty spectacular career. She won an overall at one of the biggest NPC shows, the class. She won an overall at one of the nationals. She won the universe overall.
Yep.
She got third in a pro show. She decided she did not want to do what the current criteria was, which was going to be more drugs. And she walked away from the sport, stopped tracking macros, goes to the gym a couple days a week, rides motorcycles with her boyfriend, and stays in incredible condition without tracking.
Yep.
All because, the approach she took to this sport was kept her healthy mentally and physically, so where she could just walk away, and she's amazing. She's a great example. I love seeing her talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I have multiple that, they've went on to had families and do their own things, and the sport, at least for now, is not what their interest lies. And it's one, I mean, it's nice to see them be able to have kids, and to be like healthy enough reproductively to do that.
Yeah.
But to be able to do that and still manage and stay in a really good spot in general, um, is probably one of my favorite things. It's like this weird thing. I feel like people think that as coaches, we're supposed to be encouraging people to compete forever and always do this. And I'm like, I think for most people, it's a phase of life. It doesn't last forever. And one of my favorite things is seeing people empowered to like move into the next phase of their life and still be healthy and happy and active and be in control of that on their own.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, Daraja walked off the Olympia stage and got pregnant like a month later. So like, like Anne Marie too. I remember Anne Marie's last show. She said, "If I don't win, I'm going to go start a family." She got second at the Ben Weider, and within a
Yeah.
couple months, she was pregnant. So like, yeah, the sport doesn't have to damage you or leave you high and dry. And listen, I get it. I see women talk about that, like, oh, the bodybuilding is so bad. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily agree. I've been, I call myself a bodybuilder because I started competing in 2008. I still competed up to 2023. I'll probably do a show this year or next year. It's on my mind. It's been a huge benefit for me. It's made my life better. I'm not saying there aren't moments where, like, am I optimal when I'm stage lean? Fuck no. But
Frankie.
are you going to ever do anything in life like to an excellent level and not be on one or end of the spectrum or the other, like where you're pushing too hard or pushing, like that's life. I'm not trying to drive a car 200 miles an hour, but is that healthy? No.
It's fun though.
Right. Yeah, motorcycle, Mr. Motorcycle, like I'm sure there's, like playing football, is that healthy?
No,
Running into 300-pound giant athletic men over and over again, it's not healthy, but it's an expression of the way we want to live. And that's what I think of bodybuilding is. It's been a great way to me express like my enjoyment for my body, my physique, putting on some muscle, trying to look good. Um,
and
and
there's better
so,
and worse ways to do it. Like a
well,
lot
and
of
like
people who have
the
those
thing you
really
said was like,
significant things, they did the worst way.
it's very different from person to person. So yeah, there are people that it's probably not good for them. You know, I've had friends that had an addictive personality. They were alcoholics, they were addicted to cocaine, and then when they started lifting, listen, it wasn't a good relationship. It was an addiction. Probably a better option than cocaine, but it was still, I could just see those same traits.
Right.
Like they become overly obsessive. So yeah, the sport does tend to draw those people in. And even weight loss, you know, people that want to look good will do things to the extreme. You know, this is where we get eating disorders and things like that. So I think
Dangers in the dosage.
the thing that's been fun for me is at 49 to stay the leanest I've ever stayed and show that the way that we're learning about this is productive.
Right.
That's it. Like I feel like I've found a couple of hacks that are not sexy. Walk fucking more. Eat enough protein. Resistance train or find an outlet that allows you to use your body.
When you say walk fucking more, is it like there are the comments? Is it walk, comma, fuck, comma, and more?
Yes. Have more sex. Do more walking. I tell you what, I think walking more, lifting weights will lead to more sex. I could be wrong, but
Maybe.
the more attractive you are, you might get lucky more. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I just had to be funny.
That's also a good way. But
Yeah.
for those of us that are not blessed in the humor department. So anything else you think like plateau busters?
I mean, stress management sometimes for people, but I think if we get too far into that, it's going to be a long episode.
Yeah, we could talk about like time management. That could be a whole other podcast. So love to hear your guys' comments below about these topics. What did it make you think about? Leave a comment below if there is a extension of this that you guys want to talk about, or maybe even something more specific, like actually showing you the macros and stuff for a diet break or a peak week plan. Yeah, I mean, I do love to put out more content. It's a challenge when you're busy as a coach and a dad and a business owner to do more content, but I do love it so much that I want to do it. I mean, these are topics that we're going to cover at the Command the Stage coming up. We're going to have Dr. Joe there, Brett Contreras, Steve, and myself, Lexi, Evan. It's just going to be amazing. So, you know, we're spreading the information as best we can. So we'd love to hear what you guys want to know about.
Yeah. I got nothing else.
And the mustache.
And the mustache. Well, the bald spot's getting bigger. So I feel like eventually I'm going to have to start shaving my head, and then the mustache will really be a vibe.
They call that the bird's nest, buddy. You got the bird's nest. Yeah, there comes a point where you just give up and you just keep it at a 2 or a 1. Bzz, bzz. So,
yeah, getting close.
I'm thinking about experimenting with shaving it because I see some guys with a shaved head. I'm like, damn, that dude looks good with a shaved head. I don't know if I'm one of the fortunate ones or not.
Well, the nice part is that also gives you the opportunity to get a hairpiece. You can't do a hairpiece with it at like a 1 or a 2.
Yeah, but you got to have it on the sides. You can't have shaved on the sides and a hairpiece. So I'd have to keep it relatively like normal to have a hairpiece.
Oh, that's lame.
I don't know if I want to. What is that? How does that work? They glue it down? That doesn't sound good.
No, it's fine.
Glue on a hair hat.
My father-in-law said that I could have his hairpiece to wear when the time comes. So Jillian can be just destroyed with that.
I just want some homeless man to donate his hair to me.
Yeah. One day.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening to the Pro Physique Code, and make sure you leave us a comment, and we'll get back to you.